Hello, this is episode 74 of the podcast called Blood and Rain. I'm your host, Arthur Dane. This podcast is sponsored by Anti-Fragile Fitness, fitness for fathers, fighters, and first responders. If you have multiple attributes you're seeking in fitness and don't know how to program them, come see us at Anti-Fragile Fitness. Today's podcast, our guests are Paul Fahrenheidt and Grant Brooks, founders and key members of the Old Glory Club. Thank you so much for being here, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very kindly. I'm very glad to be back.
Yeah, you have the quickest turnaround time of any guest I've had, Paul. So it's usually it's about a year in between. I've had repeats of Letters from the Ruins and Totally Anacreon, who are Instagram analysts political analysts on Instagram. But yeah, quickest turnaround. It's good to have you back, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Brooks. So, you proud old stock Anglos are part of a very old stock Anglo organization that I think is certainly going to be a net positive for, what some have called the future vanguard elite and the future of, the American aristocracy. So, why don't you give the audience play-by-play of what exactly is the Old Glory Club?
Yeah, I guess I'll get started with this. And real quick, I want to make it clear to the audience that when you say it's an old stock Anglo organization, it's not entirely limited to that. Yeah, that's a big overtone of it, but it's like, look, if you're an American and you like the civilization that the historic American people built, and you want to do what you can to help maintain and restore that civilization, then you're welcome in the Old Glory Club. I don't want to say it's entirely a civic nationalist organization, because I think words are useless. They're all useless because they're just totally abstracted from. But the Old Glory Club itself, our marketing is that we're a nonprofit dedicated to organizing and advocating on behalf of heritage Americans specifically, and Americans overall in general. It's I don't want to say it's the first of its kind, because there's a lot of organizations like it, but the Old Glory Club itself is an explicitly apolitical organization. It is a 501c8, which is we're seeking that status. We have not yet quite achieved it, but basically it is a fraternal organization. And we're legally incorporated. We have legal protections, and we operate as an entity. And basically the purpose of it is to kind of fill the gap of great American fraternal societies that exist in this weird milieu that is not quite public, but not quite private sector, where basically dudes just had an excuse to get together and drink, which is what dudes really just want to do generally. In college, the excuse is fraternities. And in American society, they used to have an adult version of fraternities. And so and the Old Glory Club is attempting to fill that gap for our guys, those who are in our general spheres, and really anyone who's somewhat related to us. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, what the organization is, what it's pushing for, and what it likes to do.
Very nice. Grant, do you see any details in Mr. Fahrenheit's description that you think are missing that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd echo all of what Paul said. We're about Americans. The Anglo part is not like, we're not going to be doing blood quantums on how many English ancestors you have, but it is, I think, very, very important for the Americans particularly to have a place where we can go, especially as sort of the situation in America continues to go the way that it's going. Being an American of the old stock, being an American of the before America, it is kind of alienating, and you need those people that you can trust. The history of fraternities in America is deeply, deeply important and influential in our ability as a nation to accomplish the things that we were able to accomplish. To have these brotherhoods of men who could trust each other, even if they wouldn't have necessarily be business partners, or they wouldn't necessarily go to the same church, but they could trust each other, and they had this relationship that was forged in this common bond that brother was able to help brother in a way that helped forge our nation. And that's what we need.
I couldn't agree more. There was an interesting tweet that I shared. I forget who it was from, but it said men these days are lacking third place, in the sense that, yes, you have the home, you're the householder, your wife and children, your extended family. You have your vocation, so the daily duty, your mission from God. Third place being somewhere men can go with like-minded men and sort of sharpen the saw with each other, which can be, more jovial in certain senses. It can just literally be going 5 rounds deep of whiskey when really you promise yourself to only do 2. Or it can be the Nietzschean climbing up of mountains, whether you're in Appalachia or you're closer to my neck of the woods on the West Coast. I think that's abundantly important. I think that's something that, is men just in general are greatly missing, especially in this nation. You see, therapy being peddled, and then you have like this this sort of Sigma lifter culture that I'm adjacent to on my sphere of Instagram that says, no, that's gay. Therapy's gay, which is, that's a whole other thing. But I think just for the general psyche of men, that's needed. So that's like the immediate lifestyle. But in terms of cultivating brotherhood with men who want to see a more positive vision for this nation, I think that's vital. That's something that every man needs. Nationalism is a healthy reflex in every single man. Duty to God and then a duty to country. How did this come about? How did the Old Glory form?
Well, interesting story. Without revealing, saying some shit that may cause some drama, which I'm not here to do. I'll speak kind of broadly. Basically, it was formed by a lot of the guys who were in the wider academic agent sphere, which we've all more or less come out of, although, we've all had sojourns and in other particular spheres. I know Mr. Grant Brooks has come from some spheres that were other than the AA sphere. I personally had my little stint in Vedic paganism in the BAP sphere. We all have our frickin' merit badge belt of every single, dissident community we've all been in. But this was generally birthed from the wider AA sphere. And I think it was because there were a lot of Americans in the AA sphere who didn't really like the fact that the Europeans were putting all this stuff together and doing a bunch of stuff, and they were starting to tell us what to do. If there's one thing that makes Americans mad, it's Europeans telling us what to do. And that's just always been the case. We just do not like it when Europeans tell us what to do. We will spite ourselves. We will do something that actively does not benefit us, that actively harms us, just to spite that European that told us what to do. European says to me, don't eat a high cholesterol diet or else you'll get a heart attack. Well, fuck you. I'm diet age 26 of a high cholesterol diet. Fucking European. You don't get to tell me what to do. But I'm kind of being facetious here, but I mean, that's kind of the thing. And so we got together and we figured that there had been a lack of and kind of to add to this too. And, Mr. Grant Brooks will probably talk about this. I mean, there's a lot of anti-American. There was, now it's starting to shift the other direction. There was quite a bit of anti-American blood libel in the dissident right, going as far back as, the post-war right. We kind of live as the consequence of the post-war right, which was founded by figures like Francis Parker Yockey, like Willis Carto, like, GLR, like other individuals who kind of survived the absolute extinction event for the American right that was the wartime New Deal purges. And a lot of there's a little bit of influence from the paleocons and Pat Buchanan and things like that, but for the most part, on the right, as it's kind of existed in these internet spheres outside of the purview of our quote unquote I was about to say betters, but we're better than them. So our overlords, there you go. Our overlords, there's been a lot of anti-American blood libel. A lot of people hate the United States. They think the United States is a race of, or a civilization of slaves to this power or that power, or America has no culture, or America's culture is this, that, and the third. And personally, I just, I'm a historian by trade, as is Mr. Brooks, and I had a lot of problems with that view.
I would echo that as well. It's extremely frustrating, right? Because you kind of get, for a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons, into this scene because you realize that you're not being told the truth about a variety of things. But to come into this scene and have it basically looking at your civilization and saying, everything that has gone wrong is your fault. America should just be destroyed. I mean, there are prominent people who have said as much. Regardless of who ruled America, America should be destroyed, even if it was ruled over by its own people. And that's, frankly, an unacceptable opinion for me. And it's unacceptable, I assume, for Paul as well. We are Americans and we seek to preserve our way of life. We want our children to be Americans and our grandchildren to be Americans. And so it was really important to form something like the Old Glory Club, particularly the structure too, because, the other thing about dissident politics is there's sort of there are several organizations to choose from that are explicitly political, like several different ways you could go if you're like, oh, I really want to do overt, direct political activism. But that's frankly not something that I feel is very helpful to us in this time and in this place. It's actually, I'd say, certainly the last 10 years have demonstrated in some ways pretty harmful to some of our guys. So there was this real need, not only for an organization by the Americans and for the Americans, but an organization that was going to be a fraternity, that was going to be about its members rather than being about sort of publicity stunts and elections and that sort of thing.
That's a very key point. And, Mr. Dane, I know you want to speak real quick, but Mr. Brooks brought that up. The OGC specifically has attempted to do what it can to learn the lessons that were given us by organizations like Identity Europa and the NJP and things like that, which was basically, don't do that. That was the lesson. Don't do what they were doing. And what Mr. Brooks said about the OGC is focused entirely on his members is entirely true. The OGC is an attempt to create a sort of human capital development scheme, not just with individual men in their various fields, but putting them in contact with a network of like-minded men. Basically, we're attempting to automate social trust. That's another thing we're trying to do. We're trying to create social trust where people can feel comfortable putting their real names and faces out there, not necessarily connecting them to their personas. However, everyone got here because of the online personas. And so it's basically, it's a strength in numbers thing. It's like, look, they can't come after us for not outright breaking the law. They would love to, but they can't. And they really are limited by those things. And so that's kind of the majority reason is that it started because we were pissed off at some of what was happening in the AA sphere. And, that started a content creation group of content creators, but it's kind of grown into this thing that really has been needed by the dissident right, and especially the American dissident right, for a long time, which is a way of legitimizing ourselves and putting ourselves back into civil society.
There's a lot to unpack there, but there's a lot of really, you're echoing a lot of my previous thoughts about the DR/AA sphere. To start, I have a lot of respect for AA. I still do, despite I think his conclusion about America is fundamentally incorrect. I think there are very clearly international classes that are not bound to any kind of statehood that are using America to subdue American citizens and to subdue Europe itself. So the average European citizen. I think that America being used to subdue Europe is a correct assessment, but the fact that it's, it's in line with the interests of the American people and that the American people actually benefit from it is clearly incorrect. I think, I think AA knows that too, but I think AA doesn't want to get into what he calls the kook sphere, where you start to, question who it is that is using America as this vehicle for doing so. America, Paul, you and I have discussed off air. Once we kind of really lost control of our monetary supply, the debate as to when. You had a really interesting theory about Jackson.
Well, that's not my theory, but keep going.
Yeah. No, I don't want to go on, too much of a tangent, but yeah, I had a lot of respect for the European contingent until they started discussing America, and honestly, it just seemed like a bit of a cope. Now, I respect our European counterparts, but the most recent podcast I did with, Instagram analyst who is now in the U.S. military, who was actually on Alex Kashuda's podcast in the summer of 22, totally not an Anacreon. I said it's kind of refreshing to speak to you because, I speak to our European counterparts. I was like, yeah, I know this is what, is being exported by America, this anti-culture, which is I'm writing an extensive Substack article about. That'll probably be finished after I have my honeymoon and move to the UK briefly. But yeah, I understand that that's what's being exported, but it's that anti-culture hit Americans first before it was exported to Europe. That's something that a lot of Europeans conveniently overlook. As far as legitimacy goes, I think that is the correct next step because, oftentimes, what do you do with your spare time? You kind of explaining, yeah, I hang out with a bunch of, internet autists who have pseudonyms, and we kind of discuss the issues of the world and the issues of our country and the issues of our people. And that can honestly seem like that can be characterized as sort of, for lack of a better term, incelly or, a waste of your time, or you're not living your philosophy, you're not living it, which is something that I often preach. With my work originally starting on Instagram, then moving to Substack and Twitter and YouTube and whatnot. I think that is the next step because it's this kind of thing where, yeah, it's not real until it is. But it does start with ideas and then materializes. And I think, and briefly back to A again, I think, also Nima Parvini, his real name, The Populist Delusion is a really important text because you saw, at least on, both Twitter and Instagram, 2019, 2020, this whole, once it reaches critical mass, once enough people know the truth, things will change. No, that's not the case. We know there's a certain amount of truth from elite theory, and I think if enough like-minded men with certain capabilities and certain backgrounds come together and they're willing to show their faces, we'll have an actual legitimate vanguard. There's another person I know, TJ Reeves. He's been doing, I think I told you about him on your most recent Garden Party Twitter space, Paul. He's doing blockchain-based land ownership. And he says, look, I don't want these remote off-grid colonies that are separated from society that can be quietly killed by, malicious forces, malicious factions within the U.S. government. No, I want these, blockchain-based 10-acre ranches connected by a clubhouse and community close to cities so we can continue to interact with society and continue to drive culture through cities because culture is always driven through cities, which is why we can't let cities go. And that's unfortunately the trend which cities are headed towards. So I think top to bottom, this is a really good idea. It's a great next step. I think the founders, the founding creators that you have, Prudentialist, Charlemagne, yourselves, I think it's a great start. In terms of, structure, in terms of the goals, because we know you have a great Substack. You two also have individually great Substacks. Grant, I really enjoyed your Res Republica article, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, very good read. All your links are in the description of this video, so everyone should check out your respective Substacks. But what is, you put out great content both in front of and behind a paywall as the OGC. But I know you are trying to take that content and put it towards, real life meetups. So what is the next step?
Do you want to take this one, Paul?
Well, I mean,
Because I can if you don't want to.
I know
I
there's,
mean-
there's a lodge system that you're kind of thinking of, which is like, some people will kind of like get scared at Masons, but Masons weren't always
okay,
compromised.
look, all right.
NFC is going to eat us.
Okay, look, I'm not even a Mason, but I have to be the fucking Mason apologist all the time. Look, guys, it was a drinking club. It always has been a drinking club. The rumors about them doing the weird stuff, they kind of let happen. They kind of let spread because they didn't want people coming in and screwing with their drinking club. All right, look, whatever happens and everyone's like, oh, but the higher degree. Look, all right, I get it. You guys are afraid of them because you don't want to be evil and you don't want to be associated with evil people. Okay, I get it. And you will know them by their fruits. Modern day Masons tend to be a little bit weird, but look, all right, I'm not a Mason. Far as I know,
I'm not a Mason either.
Yeah, as far as I know, only one member of the Old Glory Club is a Mason. But it's like, look, and he'll tell you all this too. It's like, look, the Masons are just a fraternal society, and they are much maligned because they've been fighting a secret war with the Jesuits for the past, I don't know, however many years. And part of this war has been spreading as many rumors in present society about the character of the Masons and besmirching them. And, Anglos as a people and all of our Anglified subjects on the planet basically think very similarly about this. Is you guys don't want to be evil and you don't want to even be involved in evil things. And so anything that even smacks of evil will make you hide away from it. I understand that it's a good impulse, but look, it's misplaced. And I just have to basically say this is like, look, we're not the Masons. We don't do anything secret. We're like the Masons. We're like the Masons in the sense that the Masons served to be an organizing principle. And they weren't even the only, they're just the most famous one. They were far from the only fraternal society set up by English-speaking peoples before the foundation of America, during the foundation of America. It's just they differentiate themselves from each other by having weirdo larks and wearing funny hats. But like that's the whole thing. We're organizing chapters. To answer your question more directly, Mr. Dane, we're organizing chapters nationwide. We've got a couple that are spinning up right now. We've got one in New England. We've got one around the vicinity of Atlanta, Georgia. We've got one in the Tidewater region of Virginia. Mr. Brooks is trying to set one up down in Florida. We've got one in, and we've got plenty more people, connected to each other. If any of you, by the way, if any of the listeners are interested in the Old Glory Club, I'm going to have to push this. Like, for example, you want to get in contact with Anons in your local area and you trust us enough, send us an email at theoldgloryclub@gmail.com. That's TheOldGloryClub@gmail.com. Send an email there telling us, your name, your general area. And we'll share that with Anons. We don't use Proton Mail. I'm sorry, but we don't. It's not. Look, I worked in the intelligence community. They already have everything on you. Sorry, but yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do. And really, there is no goal, Mr. Dane. There's two ways of performing anything. There is process-based actions or goal-based actions. All right. The Old Glory Club as an entity is process-based. All right. Our raison d'etre right now is to create a patchwork of chapters across the United States, basically making official something which already exists in the DR. Having that automated institution, basically turning it into an institution. Anyone from OGC can reach out to any other OGC. For example, Mr. Dane, let's say you were in the OGC chapter in, I don't know, I'm going to pick a random city in the United States and like fucking Davenport, Iowa. All right. You're in the OGC chapter in Davenport, Iowa. with all 3 other people who live in Davenport, Iowa. All right. And let's say you were taking a trip to Nashville, Tennessee. All right, for whatever reason, you could reach out to the members of the Old Glory Club chapter in Nashville and, ask them, hey, I'm going to Nashville. Do you gentlemen have, is it possible you guys could give me a place to stay? Is it possible we could meet up? I could attend one of your meetings or whatever. That's what it was meant to orchestrate. I'll add this. It's like last year at the U.S. event, I had this idea of a sort of based hostile network or a right-wing hostile network, and I went on a trip across the country, met a lot of people, ended it in Chicago, and I called it a trip to test the feasibility of a hostile network, and I learned it was feasible. But we needed some serious infrastructure before we could start doing that. And in all honesty, the Old Glory Club was an outgrowth of that kind of concept. And that's one of the various things that we're looking to provide to any sort of Old Glory Club members. Like, look, anywhere you go in the United States, guys who are in the club, who, are with it, know the same cultural symbols you do, have the same people they listen to, whatever, or at least similar enough, and you can get hospitality from them and give it to them when they're near you and all that. That's kind of what our main goal is. I don't know if Mr. Brooks has anything to add on that.
Well, I definitely do. I think another thing to state about this is that hospitality is another really ancient American tradition. And, it kind of gets a bad rap because, you hear this and you start thinking about like hotels or Disney or something. And that's not at all what I mean. The hosting of parties, the hosting of friends and acquaintances, this is something really, really ancient in the American character that actually is very, very important culturally. I think when we hear the word culture, there's a lot that you kind of have to untangle to get at places that are really, that are really concrete, that are really like you can touch them, you can feel them. There's a lot of that in even the America has no culture rhetoric of like, oh, well, then show me what it is. And it's not to say that America doesn't have a culture, but that you have to dig a little bit to find an American culture that isn't a part of this sort of mass consumerism of the post-war order. But hosting is one of these traditions in America of having your friends for this sort of thing, hosting for a fraternity or hosting a party, a garden party, dare I say. Mr. Fahrenheidt has done a great job sort of appropriating that to Twitter Spaces. And this is another thing that the Old Glory Club is interested in doing, in bringing back this sense of hosting each other.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, to put the Mason issue to bed first. For those of you who don't know, listeners, the Masons were originally a pretty harmless drinking club that eventually turned into 2 strains of Catholic Mason lodges and Protestant Mason lodges. The Protestant caught fire much quicker than the Catholic until it became somewhat of an anti-Catholic sentiment. And then the Catholic Church basically said you can't be Catholic and be a part of and be a Mason. The Masons did get weird. Like I've done enough research and I've come across too many people who have encountered this. It is like the further up you get, it does become anti-Christian. So I can't Mason I can't be a Mason apologist at this point. Maybe, in the 1700s, but at least certainly not now. That being said, I think that model of influence, right, without, sort of whether it be light occultic or dark occultic influence spiritually, right? The core of which being, as you gentlemen have said, essentially Christian and American. That core belief system, whether it's different strains of Christian and different strains of American for that matter. I think that's certainly on the nose. And having people who align with you, you're a part of the lodge, you're a part of the club in different cities. I think that's very valuable. And when it comes to, I mean, what you said about American culture is also very interesting as well. There's in the Orthodox Church that I'm a convert of. I was converted into the Russian Orthodox outside of Russia tradition, and then eventually went into the Orthodox Church of America, which is an autocephalous Orthodox church that was founded in the early 1970s. What we're starting to see as Orthodoxy catches fire here in the United States is you see any Orthodox church, whether it be in Russia or Greece or Romania or even Alaska for that matter, you have the essence of Orthodoxy at the top, and just below it you have the essence of the nation. The open question for the Orthodox Church of America is, what is that American essence, right? And I'm saying this as a parallel to what you guys are discussing, because I think this is, certainly on the nose of what you're trying to preserve. We've noticed, we have the Orthodox essence, but you go to an Orthodox of America church in Bozeman, Montana, right? And there is one in Bozeman, Montana. It's not going to feel Greek. It's not going to feel Russian. It actually does feel American, but it feels American in the essence of both locality and sort of Anglo founding stocks ideas of what this nation is to be, and what it should be, and hopefully what it will continue to be down the line. It's the roots of America.
Well, Spader, sorry, Mr. Grant Brooks, please forgive me. Mr. Grant Brooks, I told you I was going to do it at least one. Mr. Grant Brooks has more of a theological angle to it. I mean, my opinion about the Orthodox Church in the United States is that I think the reason it is catching fire at the moment, especially amongst guys who are in our sort of spheres, is that it's one of these churches that at least ostensibly seems like it isn't, it's a combination of something novel, but also something that, that is it feels like church. It feels like what, Christianity has been told to be. Yeah. It's extremely reverent, and that's why it's finding a ready-made, people, America is one of those essences of of America, Mr. Dane, is that America is a Christian nation. America is not just a Christian nation; it is probably one of the most Christian nations. In terms of its pure essence, it is totally distilled Christianity. More grace can be found here more than almost anywhere else, and at the same time, that's more sin can be found here than anywhere else, because a city on a hill, of course, will be the number one place that Lucifer attempts to attack. And that's really the battle we're seeing here right now, but it's not just the Orthodox, now, and I'll tell you this, right? One of those essences of what America is when the Orthodox Church comes here, they're going to start getting a lot more Calvinist, because almost every American inherently is just a Calvinist. They don't even, whether they realize it or not. Like, if you explain to an American the concept of predestination without using the word, they just oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. If God is real, then, well, yeah, I guess, of course it makes sense that he'd probably plan everything and knows everything. It's not even a leap to them, that, of course, that thing will, Calvinism is more than predestination, but that specific thing turns a lot of people off. But another aspect to it is that America is a country built by dissidents for dissidents. That's why it's a,
not to interrupt you too much here, Paul, but American Christianity it's not just because it is Protestant and it is Calvinist. But even more than that, it's very, very low church. It's very backwoods. It's very fundamentalist in its expression of Christianity, more so than I think you could point to almost any country that I can think of in recent history. And I like fundamentalism as a movement, though it has, a hold on other places, really finds its lifeblood here. So it's not just that, American Christians and Americans, they're going to have a view that we as a people are more bathed in the Bible in some ways than almost anyone perhaps ever has been. Maybe not so much now, but certainly a century ago. And certainly I would say the America that has been here for 400 years is absolutely saturated in the Bible. And that produces a particular kind of Christianity that winds up looking very different. I think perhaps some of the appeal of orthodoxy, in a sense, for some of the guys in the dissident right is that it does look very, very different from the traditional American expressions of Christianity. And, that's partially due to its size and its relative newness. But that's definitely something that I think, and I don't know how familiar you are with this, but even the Orthodox Church starting to encounter the arguments of like young earth versus old earth creationism and Darwinism, which are like that is a almost core debate of American fundamental Christianity for the last century at least. I mean, we've had presidential candidates who debated young earth creationism versus like old earth Darwinism.
So yeah, there's with respect to the Calvinist bit, there's not really going to be any situation where the Orthodox Church becomes more like, yeah, maybe people will internalize certain Calvinist ideals. I think the parallels between Orthodox and Calvinism and praxis is, this is God's dominion, plain and simple. Like, he knows all. The book of Job certainly displays we will never understand God's plan in its entirety. It's literally impossible. That being said, we've endured 800 years of Muslim invasion, and we endured the Soviet Union, which is probably the single worst situation that any Christians have ever had to live under. So if and this has been our standing and will continue to be our standing, if you have Christian as an Orthodox Christian in the hierarchy of what you prioritize, and then American right below it, then it won't inherently become Calvinist, right? It will have a culture that, yes, is probably founded by Calvinists, but provided you have that orientation, it'll be in context for us, and we'll stay steadfast. And we always have, and we always will. There's certain instances where heresy comes about. We have the idea that, we are a physical body and a spiritual body as a church. We are open about the fact that the physical will make mistakes. The spiritual will eventually correct it. An example of this is iconoclasm, thankfully corrected by Empress Theodora and St. John of Damascus. As far as the low church bits go, that's very interesting as well, because we have, surging mission parishes, in South Dakota and all over the South. More even increasingly so in California. California was a big landing spot for Orthodoxy, and it's the birthplace of American Orthodoxy in the lower 48, because it first started in Alaska. But St. Ignatius echoed when he was, Bishop of Antioch, saying, yes, the bishops are here to meet and to look after the flock and answer questions in councils about our faith, what we believe as Christians, coming together in prayer to state what it is that we believe. But the church actually is the church you go to every Sunday for liturgy and every Saturday for vigil. So there are parallels. I think we're seeing increasingly so in Appalachia, like the low church is becoming Orthodox. My first church is actually like a formerly Episcopal church. You can just see the architectural style. Now it's green and brown with an Orthodox cross atop it. Not to get too much into a theological tangent. That's definitely something for another podcast. I'm sure I'll speak about that with Thomas 777 in person tomorrow, because he's certainly a Calvinist as well. But I want to keep honing in upon, like, yes, and I like what you said, Paul, about like there's process based and goal based. You kind of see that too with execution in combat sports that I've seen in the day-to-day practice. That process, what does that look like? That essence of Americana, where do you think that comes in as a unifying feature for the entire nation? And where do you see that differing lodge to lodge, area to area? Because obviously this is a 10,000-foot question, right? But it is, you guys are 10,000-foot thinkers. Your Substacks, clearly display that, despite the fact that Paul Fahrenheidt, you're a day-to-day military man, Virginia National Guard. So you're certainly pragmatic as well, and every Anglo is pragmatic by nature. But this 10,000-foot view, like, how do you see that materializing?
Well, I mean, I'm going to try not to take up more airtime than I think I deserve on that question. I mean, my opinion is just my opinion. All the other OGC members, and there's a lot of us, they'll probably give you their own opinion as what they see it. But, the whole point of the OGC is that it's decentralized. Yeah, we have a central Politburo committee. I kind of say tongue in cheek. But, we do, any of you who are in a college fraternity, you have the fraternity itself and then all of the various chapters spread across campuses in the United States. It's the same way. We have the OGC that basically sets the standard of the bare minimum each chapter has to adhere to. There will probably be some sort of compliance board in the future of like basically circuit guys who, that's another goal of the OGC, is to have it be something that can actually give people full-time employment, and not like just like shit full-time employment either. Like our hope is to get the OGC to such a point where someone could make a decent living working for the OGC as a full-time employee of, and literally what they do is it would be anything from, accounting to handling our legal issues to just traveling the country like a circuit preacher, making sure that the chapters aren't doing anything too fucking weird, or and this is the thing with Mr. Dane. This is the thing with any sort of massive organization, is you need a compliant sector to be like, hey guys, are you holding up the rules? And plus, like the central committee, we reserve the right basically if and the reason I say that is barring all of that, we throw our hands up and say, local chapters, you do whatever you do. You are meant to represent your area, in particular in the American whole that is the OGC. It's a microcosm of the United States in that regard. The United States really, with the federal government structure, de jure, if not necessarily, although increasingly more de facto, is kind of like the Holy Roman Empire or the Hanseatic League. It was set up to be that way. It was set up to be a confederation, not just of states, but of entities within states. So if, for example, a bunch of fucking, Scandies from Minnesota set up the OGC Viking chapter in Duluth. Okay, they're gonna I'm not gonna have them worshiping the founding fathers as the central patrons of their chapter or whatever. I would appreciate a side glance as to the ones who made it possible. But look, they're Scandies. They're gonna do what they do. Same thing with Midwest Germans. Same thing with if there's a Cajun chapter, same thing with them. Same thing with, with whomever, it's like, look, we like diversity within a certain spectrum. All right. We like diversity as long as you're a European. That's the thing here. And as long as you can find precedent and you kind of accept whose civilization you're currently living in and seeking to uphold. I don't know if that answered your question in part or really even in whole.
Well, to add on here, what we're doing, the whole lodge structure is basically, what we're borrowing from the Masons is purely their social technology. The chapters themselves do have a high degree of autonomy beyond, I would say, I don't know that we've set it in stone exactly, but basic morality things. We don't want people doing anything crazy, and we want people to act in a way that is becoming of Americans, of people who are respectable. We are trying to build this into a fraternity, but of course the regions are going to be influenced by the particular flavor of Americana that their members hail from. I mean, a Florida chapter is going to look very different even than a Virginia chapter, and then compared to a Utah chapter. And as long as they are all united in this, we are Americans and we're by and for the Americans, and we're interested in preserving America as a genuine beating heart nation, Like they have a great deal of autonomy and what they're able to do and how they can make things look.
I like that answer a lot, honestly. And I think that's the answer that makes the most sense. And I think, you kind of see within the DR, the consistent post-liberal questions. There's a lot of, looking to Polybius, looking to Spengler, looking to, Vico and whatnot. There's also, an ode towards decentralization, maybe not necessarily for purely decentralization's sake. I made this argument actually, close to 2 years ago with a guy named Arthur Quan Lee. He's become this, been dubbed as like the artist of the manosphere, and he's even getting attention from Joe Rogan now. But we talked about how, decentralization isn't necessarily always for decentralization's sake. It's sort of to re-centralize around the right ideals. But even within that, as you create sort of an alternative network, you don't necessarily want, to formulate like an American fascist state. Like a lot of people are like looking for the Caesarean figure. And Paul, you wrote a great article about this, how that's not necessarily a good sign for society, whether it's your guy or not. And I'm inclined to agree in the context of the new world. I would like to see the old world remain the old world. And I would like to see the new world remain the new world. I actually think that's a pretty healthy dynamic for the world in its entirety. Do I want to see the return of the Tsar and the return of Constantinople? Of course I do. I'm Orthodox. My patron saint is Constantine. And I think even if you're a Western European, you would prefer that over the current state of, we'll leave that where it is. But I want to see the new world remain the new world. And I think that's the right balance of decentralization, as you guys have mentioned. There's like a unifying ideal, and as you said, Paul, people going around like, hey, are you not being an absolute imbecile? And, sort of giving the old Glory Club a bad name with your policies locally and your answers and your social standing in your locale. Like, I think that's, that's sort of the counterbalance that's needed. We have a similar sort of situation going on in OCA of de-boomerizing. And I think I don't actually know your opinion on sort of so-called fourth generation combat of like sort of fluid, extra decentralized combat, but I think that's probably going to be the most efficient. And what's going to be cool about that too, as well, is you're going to have different lodges have different strengths. I imagine, my post-Europe excursion, if I move back to San Francisco and there was a San Francisco lodge, that's certainly going to be one that's going to act a bit differently than one in Little Rock, or rural Arkansas. They're certainly going to be a lot more out in the open in a place like Arkansas than they will be in San Francisco. It'd probably be public enemy number one in San Francisco, to be honest.
Well, and we've even had some conversations about that. Because OGC, look, I'm under no illusions that, OGC is attempting, once again, we're an apolitical organization and we're attempting to, keep our organizational status as, apolitical as possible. But I guarantee you, and, Mr. Brooks probably agrees with me, some leftist is going to figure out who we are and we're going to get identified really quickly at some point or another, and that may bring flack on people for being involved with us as an organization. However, I think we're timing this pretty right at the shift of an Overton window, because I don't know if you noticed this, but the Overton window has surely been shifting a lot more violent recently. A lot more mainstream, conservative figures have started parroting or placing themselves adjacent to certain talking points that would have, that they were betraying people over a couple of years ago, which I think is very interesting. But I digress. But there's even this talk of like having, let's say, like a San Francisco chapter, whether or not you actually externally use the OGC branding or anything like that. Like, yeah, you're still a chapter and you're still like subsidiary to our laws and stuff like that. But like that's the level that we're even considering doing. Like, if you're in outright enemy territory, calling yourself, I don't know, the Golden Gate Society or something like that,
I like the sound of that. That's very
yeah. It's
keep going.
And this is an ongoing debate, and this is the kind of stuff we're talking about right now. I don't want to give you all too much inside baseball, but this is the kind of stuff we're wondering is because really the OGC is, because it's process-based, it's a vehicle of getting our guys in network with each other in an official capacity to supplement the unofficial capacity we're already in network with each other. Go ahead.
I'm forgetting his name. The distributist. Okay, I'll just go with that. The distributist, in his talk at the U.S. event this year, had this really good point, and he's where he was essentially saying that we have this great connectivity that we have through the internet, but it's very, very important to actually bring it into real life, to move the parasociality into an actual social environment. And that's really what we're about. I mean, I've called this sort of a social technology before, but that is, that's exactly what it is. And the fact of the matter is, if you do anything, I mean, if you go outside your house, there is always some level of risk. If you're involved in this thing in any capacity, even if it's just purely on a Twitter account, there is some level of risk, and we can't totally eliminate it. But the way that we're doing this, we are very deliberately building an organization that will be able, as much as possible, to protect its members, an organization that will not present a target to our enemies the way that all these other organizations in the past really have. That's something that within ourselves we're being deliberate in how we build and the way that we're expanding to try and keep our members out of the eye of Sauron, as it were, as much as possible.
That makes perfect sense. And to your point, Paul, dangerous white supremacist, like fascist extremist group, that's probably going to be an inevitability at this point. I mean, the fact that it's like, European American, club. I mean, that's obviously going to be contentious, but we're also at a point now where, like, you're either gonna feel guilty for being white or you're not. Like, I'm from the most left-wing place on the planet. Okay, you can make an argument for Portland on a given day. You can make an argument for Seattle. I've been to Seattle. I've been to Portland. It's not close. It's Oakland, San Francisco. That is the most left-wing place on the fucking planet. Okay, I have been in, like, during COVID. I was in downtown Oakland when the beginning of Summer of Floyd was about to, like, kick off. I saw the mostly peaceful protesters walking down Broadway. Okay, you want to talk about, like, enemy territory? That is enemy territory in terms of, oh, you want to say something nice about white people? I don't know about all that, right? Now, my personal Instagram, I kind of use sometimes as like a litmus test, see where people are at. How quickly can I red pill, the white liberals and multiracial community? These are people who are my friends in the day to day. I can put aside differences and so sort of suspend disbelief, and they're still dear friends. How quickly can I red pill them? To your point, Paul, it is interesting because it's been a very gradual thing since 2020, and now all of a sudden I feel comfortable ramping it up, being like, hey, like, I am not going to feel guilty for being white. No ancestors are innocent, plain and simple. And pretending that we were more victorious in a more barbaric age suddenly makes us the ultimate villains. No, you would have done the same. That's a point that's being repeated by Bill Maher. Elon Musk is killing Jonathan Greenblatt to go screw himself. Tucker Carlson is having raw nationalists on his show and repeating some things from BAP, of all people. Yeah, it is interesting that things are accelerating, and that says a lot about where the state of the quote-unquote silent majority is at. But at some point, the silent majority needs to stop being so silent, and I think this is interesting timing that you guys have.
Well, shit. Charlie Kirk today was going on about how the United States was founded. Charlie Kirk. I'm not making this up. He was going on today about how the United States was founded by the Anglo-Saxon people according to Anglo-Saxon law and Anglo-Saxon culture. Like, what?
Yeah, and that's a fact. That is a fact. That's the fact that it's scary to say that truth out loud is just absolutely nonsensical. So we're finally back to some kind of sanity.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that one, Mr. Dane. I'm just saying.
Very
beginning of some kind of
place, because I think Trump did really break like the whatever we call, like, I don't know, the post-war consensus, whatever you want to call it. Like, I think in a very real sense, Trump has shattered it, and like the right wing is kind of now in open war over to what degree we're even interested in this historical consensus anymore. And I mean, that's what you see. I mean, that's Charlie Kirk is going back to these things that you would have heard the right wing say, you know, a century ago about Anglo-Saxon principles of government and our founding. And I mean, you just see this on so many levels. And I think it makes living in this time really exciting, but it does make it a very precarious thing, you know. Trump obviously facing like 4 indictments now from all these various jurisdictions. And I think it is really because people sort of understand that at the moment, a lot of brains are broken and a lot of consensus is broken. And this is a time of incredible opportunity because of it.
Yeah, the timing with the Trump indictments too is actually hilarious. Like, if you track the Hunter Biden story, anytime there's a development, a day later they go after Trump, like literally to the T. It's hilarious. But yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you guys, not by much, but I remember, you know, as a young cat, you know, teenager, when Obama became president. I just remember that feeling so scary, like legitimately scary. It's like, what? I mean, you know, you guys are in different states. I was in California, and it's just like, whoa, like, why can't I say anything about this? And there's like that gridlock, just smug culture. It's just like, oh really, you disagree with this? Oh well, you just must be stupid. Like, you just must be a really stupid person. And it was just like, oh shit. And, you know, my dad escaped communist Cuba. My mom briefly lived through the reign of terror in Argentina, because, you know, Argentina is basically Italy, Germany in some areas, but it's basically Italy. And so, you know, my grandfather lived under Perón. He was going to middle school, and, you know, there were bombings in Buenos Aires. Like, it's that's what it felt like. And I was like, wow, we're really never going to break this. Like, you couldn't say a damn thing. And Trump didn't care, and he had enough charisma and enough resources and enough willpower to not care to actually break that. And when it goes in the other direction of Biden, people are realizing, like, oh, okay, maybe he was onto something, and I think that's what we're seeing now. And you know, another point, maybe this is somewhat of a tangent, but maybe not. You know, Grant, I mentioned before, I really liked your article, Res Publica. Paul, you mentioned the palace coup. I think RFK Jr. has a lot to do with this recent acceleration, because he's echoing a lot of the points of 100 years ago, like you were saying, Grant.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, like readings, especially his like really early tweets. First of all, just like the issues that he gives attention to, that just like where you can really almost see like this victory where this consensus has been broken. But the really interesting thing in the early days was like his whole rhetoric about, you know, I respect Joe Biden, but I'm running because of deep concerns about like the corruption of the country. Like, you could see he was very polite about it, but there were all these like little hints of like, yeah, actually, we just figured out that we are kind of ruled by this deep state that has no accountability whatsoever to nominal elections, and that naked corruption, if it's in the right direction, will just go completely unchecked, and if anything, defended by these organs of the state. And that's incredible, because there was this period, you know, I wasn't obviously as old as you were, but there was this period during Obama where it was just like, you know, the march through the institutions was complete, and it was just, you know, everything was going to go down with nary any resistance. But Trump coming back and really, I mean, I really do think that a lot of what he's accomplished is just completely irreversible. Like there's nothing that can be done. You can't go back from the way that Biden looks, even compared to Obama, which is, only like 1 or 2 presidents ago. The degree to which his administration just looks so nakedly corrupt and illegitimate. And that is because Trump forced these people to show their hand. That is because Trump had the courage to go out and go to war. And that's, that is pretty significant.
Yeah, it's I mean, like, to be honest, there was, to be a bit comical for a split second, even in 2020. I remember, no one seems to remember this when I bring it up, but Joe Biden was doing like a town hall forum thing with Anderson Cooper. And obviously Anderson Cooper is giving him low balls upon low balls. And at some point, Biden, I'm paraphrasing here, he responds with something of the like of, yeah, in San Francisco it was bathhouses and nonstop gay sex. And like Anderson Cooper literally looks at him like, sir, I am trying to help you walk it in, and you are still messing this up. Are you serious? And then you just, like, I sent this clip to my mother yesterday or 2 days ago of Kamala Harris trying to speak again. And she's talking about, I love the Venn diagram, those 2 circles. It was just like, this has to be an all-time low in the rhetoric of American politicians, let alone, the alleged executive branch. Like, it's hilarious, but then it becomes a nervous laughter and it makes you laugh even louder. Yeah, we're at an emperor has no clothes moment.
You can't look at the country the same way anymore. Like there just has been a curtain that's been torn, and people have just seen. And there's and you can almost I think in the electorate, you can almost see them wishing that they could imagine this away. That you can just go back to no, it's not. It was never this bad, but it just is. The truth has been revealed to a degree that you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No, certainly not. And I think, to the point of RFK, it's like when I look at what he's talking about, okay, you started as an environmental lawyer, right? It's pretty shit-libby kind of thing, for lack of a better term, right? That being said, there's a strain on the right wing that is very much, pro Uncle Ted in certain facets of society. Uncle Ted, rest in peace. But he wants the reshoring of American manufacturing. I think that's brilliant. That's something I want, right? He wants to replenish the soil. That's vital, right? That's probably the most legitimate crisis we have within the next 30 years of our just day-to-day lives, right? There's a lot of what he's saying that's going to sort of cure the competency crisis. Yes. Okay. Do I like what he just said about abortion? Absolutely not. Right. Trump is kind of saying openly, he's against abortion. At least last time I checked. I have no idea. Don't quote me on that. I'm not constantly looking at politics, guys. Right. That's not what we're
Trump
really
appointed the justices that overturned Roe. I mean, that speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I was listening to T7 talk about the real reason for Roe v. Wade was an incredibly racist thing in 1973 because the talking point was about overpopulation. Like if you didn't believe that overpopulation was going to be a thing, you were treated as an idiot. And now that's less of a problem, and Roe v. Wade is less of a big deal for certain factions of the regime, and because overpopulation isn't really a thing. And that
real quick, Mr. Dane, I don't mean to interrupt your thought here, but could I insinuate something real quick? Just a question. All right.
Certainly.
I'm not here. I'm not in favor of life for life's sake, as Baps says it. I agree with that, but isn't literally the first commandment God ever gave us was to go forth and multiply?
Exactly.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. Keep going.
Yeah, no, that's very, very well put, Paul. I just obviously, if you're a Christian first, says you can't have any gods before Christ, then you are not going to be for state-sanctioned infanticide. You're just not. That being said, let's look at the situation at hand. Grant, before your Twitter got Elon'd, it's kind of weird to say out loud. It's supposed to zucked because I'm so used to saying zucked coming from Instagram and seeing most of my friends on Instagram zucked. But you talked about how. Since the blues, since the Democrats control everything. You can really only, make permanent change through the blues. I don't know how much. I don't know. I agree to that point to a pretty significant extent, but that being said, you kind of almost have to play nice briefly to get control of that, to then consolidate power.
Well, you do have to be careful with that. I'm obviously not going to tell someone to don't don't support evil in the hopes of getting something out of it per se. But the point is more in terms of electoral politics, because of the nature in Democrat parties. The Republican Party, the way it is built, is to use crises to extract money from the people worried about the direction of the country. Like, the Republican Party is not built in any way, shape, or form to actually stop the things that are going wrong. And that was a hard realization to come to. And again, one that I think maybe I wouldn't have come to without, probably, almost certainly I wouldn't have come to without Trump sort of bringing this stuff into the light. But the fact of the matter is the Republican Party is not going to fix anything, because their entire structure is based on extracting money from the people who are worried and want things fixed. Like, they have absolutely no infrastructure to actually do any of the fixing. And the Democrat Party has a lot of issues, but they have more of a traditional party structure. So that's another thing that makes RFK really interesting, is that he is coming from the left. And one of the points that I've made to Paul before, and I don't know if you would have heard it, I may or may not have said it on my Twitter, but that American Caesar, when he comes, an American Caesar would come from the left. And the reason for this is just the nature of how things are, just in terms of both the party structure and sort of American history of the last century or so. And I think there's something to be said. I think that there's some parallels with RFK, calling him sort of a blue Caesar of sorts, because he really is promising a sort of return to a level of competence that everyone can feel slipping through their fingers right now. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. But, obviously there's an open question as to whether he'd be allowed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the question of whether or not he'd be able to get the nomination. That's, certainly.
Well, that too, right?
Question from a pragmatic standpoint. But yeah, I mean, I'm sort of willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's saying what he needs to say to get the nomination. And I mean, T.R. Hudson and I talked about this. He's one of the few people I've ever seen who literally looks like he means what he says. Genuinely, right? And yeah, that could be naive, right? He could just be a really incredible deceiver, right? I'm not saying he's the Antichrist for anyone who's jumping on that, but that is the read that I get on him, and I doubt that he's going to be legitimately pro infanticide if the whole bit with vaccines, that story where that woman whose child had a vaccine injury, that's why he became this champion for the anti-vax movement, at least when it comes to the COVID vaccine, in the thick of COVID, to the point where he got zucked. He stuck his neck out. It's very interesting. And, both his father and his uncle were assassinated for going against the grain, whether it was fully in agreement with our values or not. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in that regard, because everything that he's saying, if he was to seize control of the party that actually has power, that is, that's certainly it's certainly something that would be more so in our interest. The other thing I've been seeing thrown around is that he would be Trump's VP candidate, because we know Trump's going to get the Republican nomination.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
It would be so cool, though. it would I don't know why you have to be such a pessimist, Mr. Brooks. I know it's your character trait and everything, but it's like
no, it's just how it is.
It would no.
But it's not going to happen, man.
No, I'm gonna fantasize here real quick, and I'm gonna make it a reality. All right.
Go ahead.
No, this is gonna happen. Right? No, it's not gonna happen. But look, it'd be really cool if it did, though. Like, come on, guys. Don't you want to see what is it? I don't know. At the end of the day, we really are all Marvel fanboys. It's just our Marvel is different, and we like our version of Marvel better. But I used to say this, and I'm going to keep saying this, but right now there is a Trump-sized hole in American politics. There is a Trump-sized hole in American politics, and that's because the only man that can fill that hole is basically everything, and the kitchen sink is being thrown to keep him from being able to step back into the ring at anything resembling I wouldn't even say a quasi-fair fight, but like one hand tied behind his back, because he could win with one hand tied behind his back. He did it in 2016. But like, you know, and I mean, and so like we've kind of totally like deviated from the OGC, and I'm here for it.
We can land it.
We can, but it's like we don't have to just talk about that. Like the thing is with it is it's like the thing about RFK that deeply unsettles me is if he were to win, it would just be like a silver age. That's all it would be. It would be a false recovery. You know, RFK addresses none of the root issues of social rot. You know, he focuses on some things regarding food policy and regarding chemicals drastically impacting the, human populace. But I don't think he's willing to bring law and order back to cities in the way that needs to be done. And I don't think he's willing to consider certain realities of, not just the American political situation, but the human political situation. Things like, hey, race exists and needs to be accounted for properly. Right now, the U.S. accounts for it very improperly, actually in the opposite way it ought to. And when I say this, Mr. Dane, this pisses some people off, but like, honestly, I think we should have affirmative action explicitly for white people only. You should, and this is essentially what occurred back in DARPA and all that and that's just simply because, if you cultivate and educate your best human capital, you tend to create an amazing civilization that, absolutely shatters bounds. And look, by cultivating, go ahead.
I don't know, Mr. Dane, if you've read my article that I believe is titled The Western British Empire.
That's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yes. So in that, I kind of explain like where the WASP as such came from. And I mean, RFK, obviously, Kennedy, he's Irish, but like he plays WASP as hard as possible. And what this class was essentially creating these sort of, or rather having these three institutions, that being the Episcopal Church, the U.S. military, and the Ivy Leagues, that could take the best and brightest of the hinterlands of sort of, middle America, or just, any part of America that wasn't from means or wasn't from wealth, but you could put them through any one or all of these three institutions and turn them into essentially your imperial class, the people that you could trust to run your empire well. And I think to Paul's point, the issue that we have right now is that, the Americans that are American, for lack of a better description, are a waning part of the population. They're treated like crap. If you are one of these really intelligent white people, like the Episcopal Church, the U.S. military, and the Ivy Leagues, you probably hate your guts, and your chances of getting through any of those institutions, getting through when they're hostile to you, it's theoretically possible, but it's prohibitively difficult. And I'm
still trying,
God bless Paul for still trying, but it's night and day compared to where these institutions were really turned into places where they were looking for this sort of person. They were trying to find the best of the Americans to make into this sort of class that was both capable and deserved to rule this country. And that's something that we would like. I don't know how you get back to that place. I agree with what was said about RFK. It would be I certainly support him, even though it would be a temporary solution. I think there's a lot to be said for, even in the Bible, these times where a good king would come along and he didn't fix the problems of Israel, but he gave a generation or two peace and prosperity and good and just rule. I think that's something that's admirable. But these more fundamental problems with America, like, I don't know how you fix that from a policy standpoint in some ways. I mean, it's so difficult to circle at this point, given the incentive structure and who is, for lack of a better description, in charge right now.
Well, Mr. Brooks, you don't fix it from a policy perspective. Policy can only enhance pre-existing, quality. It cannot correct bad quality. The best it can do is stave off the bleeding. And the best way that we address the root of the problem is basically by avoiding politics in the national sense. People and I'm not talking about local politics, or really politics in any sense altogether, at least as a first principle. The way we start fixing the root of the problem is through organizations like the Old Glory Club. The United States' preeminence was built off basically 100-something, 200 years of social trust that was cultivated very carefully within communities that basically bore fruit in the early 20th century. That was basically all harvested by the managerial state, by the New Deal administration, and was able to be used to create some absolutely fucking astounding things like the Manhattan Project, like the space program, like the internet, things like that. And well, now it's a time of, okay, well, we hate the fact that we were born after the period of the great harvesting, and now we're kind of planting seeds again. But the answer is, act as though the second coming won't be for another 5,000 plus years. Yeah, and this is. I mean, I'm not going to get into theology here, but this is why post-mills have such a good argument. But at least in terms of, even if they're not correct theologically, they are correct in terms of organizing a civilization. Everyone in society should live and act and organize themselves as though Christ is not coming back until they bring the whole world under dominion, because that tends to bring about the best societies. And that's not a theological statement. That is a civilizational statement. And the Old Glory Club is along these kinds of lines. We are trying with organizations like it to recreate the essence of what made America such a good country in the first place, such a unique culture that de Tocqueville comments upon in Democracy in America, where things just simultaneously get done and communities just simultaneously keep themselves functioning without any sort of interference from anyone on the outside. That is what the Old Glory Club is attempting to encourage and to cultivate. Not just members of the club, but the club members' families, business deals, political affiliations, social affiliations, etc. Is we're trying to cultivate very well-rounded individuals in network as a whole, and even possibly create a constituency out of it, which is the only thing that really reverses a decline. All declines are demographic, all declines are cultural, all declines are in many ways genetic. And the only way that this is solved is through simply doing the reverse of what the trend is favoring. And the OGC is attempting to at least begin pushing in that direction.
We're attempting to form, in essence, a society. The meme is we live in a society. The problem is we actually don't live in a society. That's what's wrong. When we hear these words society and culture, we have these notions that come from, I think, sort of a managerial view of the matter. But like, society is you and your friends going out to drink. Society is like having a party that you and your buddies put on for a famous holiday. Society is, going on a camping trip together or visiting a famous battlefield together. What we're attempting to do is to rebuild this real organic sense that we are a people, that's what our organization is really about.
Yeah, so I don't know about the white affirmative action. Can't really get behind that. I will respond
for
to
high IQ whites, basically, like anyone. look, it's literally like the reverse of affirmative action, like where dysgenics are promoted. Basically, failure should be punished harder.
It's
in
just
the United
meritocracy
States
with guidelines.
Literally, well, no, it's ultra meritocracy. It's super meritocracy, solemn meritocracy, if you will.
So true.
Basically, anyone with an IQ below a certain point in the United States should just not be raised expectation that will go to an Ivy League. They just simply, that should never even enter into consideration for them. Not because they suck, but because, look, and now this may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because meritocracy is like, well, quality can come from anywhere. But no, I don't necessarily think that. Maybe I'm too special, but it's like, Mr. Dane, I should be in the officer corps of the United States military right now, based upon my merits, on track to do what I was bred to do over the past fucking 90 years, which is staff the Defense Department of the United States government. Mr. Brooks here should be making his way up the State Department or some other aspect of the United States government, because that is what his family were bred to do. And I specifically say bred to do because the United States is a eugenics project, and almost every subgroup within it is a result of eugenics. The human civilization is a eugenics project. It's an attempt. It's literally selecting for genes which advance certain outcomes faster and more consistently than anything else. Positive eugenics, I guess you could say. And so it's like, that's the problem with it, Mr. Dane. And that's what I mean by white affirmative action, is like, people like us who were born, raised in a certain environment, ready to go into a certain, should, with principles, should be placed into these, and this may just be because we're regime rejects, but should not become backstabbing, social climbing sycophants, or should not have to be forced to make the choice to either become that or a regime reject, because that's how a regime fucking destroys its own future. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to, I had to put that in there.
Right. I mean, okay. So again, I don't think I can get behind white affirmative action. What I can get behind is, Clarence the Goat Thomas 2 summers in a row does some base shit. Like, he strikes down affirmative action, right? In the sense that, yeah, meritocracy by IQ, yeah. Obviously, if you're like a 80 IQ person, you shouldn't be going to Harvard. That makes perfect sense. And anyone who says that it doesn't is like ridiculous. Then Harvard stops being Harvard. Just that simple, right? So yeah, I agree with in that sense. I mean, personally, like even like I did a stint in Silicon Valley, right? I was sales, marketing, account management in Silicon Valley. And then when I decided I want to be a professional fighter, I quit because I needed the days to train, and I got a job as a bouncer, right? And then I got a job as, within a year, I was the hardest working man in the room. I went from, bouncer to bar manager to being asked if I wanted to be the GM of a very, very highly disciplined, high stress cocktail bar, which is a much bigger culture in California and New York than anywhere else in the country, right? I eventually go to another bar. So I moved to New York. I come back to the Bay Area. I get a job in Oakland through some contacts. And I remember it's like, yeah, this place is massive, 2 mezzanines, it's huge, right? And I was like, cool, sounds high stress, sounds high paying. I want both those things. I like stress because it makes me a better fighter, and I like money because I need money. It's the Bay Area, it's very expensive. I remember walking into that bar, and I put my stuff down in the locker room, and I see a bunch of really hipster white chicks and black chicks look at me basically like, what the fuck is he doing here? You have this 6'1", 230 man in a flannel, and for some reason I was wearing a digital fatigue army surplus cap too, and I was wearing boxing shoes because I always bartend in boxing shoes because I can move better behind the bar. And they look at me like, what the fuck is he doing here? And I was like, oh shit, okay, I was not what they intended to be like I was not the model of bartender that they wanted, I did not meet the demographic that they were looking for to work here, but they need an ace in the hole, so fine. I became the hardest working man in the room again. I was the top seller by a wide margin. I built a regular base from scratch from, good service. And I still felt like I was under scrutiny at all times just because I'm a straight white male. Like, obviously, that is the opposite of meritocracy. So to your point. So, that's the most immediate way I can certainly understand that. And I think it's absolute nonsense. I turned down a job to be a cop in San Diego because they were just instituting the vax mandate. It's just ridiculous. Like, and I think that is part of the reason where we're getting to this point where, this acceleration is just like, okay, how many nonsensical things can I see before I really start to question things? Like an honorary transgender admiral for inclusion. I don't even know what that person's, position is. Whatever made up job title. Right? General Miley, the fact that
what the fuck happened to him is what I want to know, because he was like, you look at his chest, you look at all the fucking badges he's wearing. How did he get through Ranger School, Special Forces selection, U.S. Army Dive School, which is the hardest, most physically demanding school in the United States Army, and how did he make it up to chairman of the Joint Chiefs, having gone through all that and turn out the way he is now? How did that happen? Like, it's indicative, Mr. Like, if you want to really get me going, get me started on the state of the officer corps of the United States military. That's how you get me mad. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
Actually, since there's always it's kind of devolving. Like your and I's podcast about literature did the same thing with T.R. Hudson, but I'm here for it. I am getting ready. One of the guys in Anti-Fragile Fitness, he's getting ready. I'm getting him physically ready for, I won't say which special operations selection. And, he's certainly ahead of the curve. And I was telling him about, the fact that you just need a university degree to be an officer in the United States military is ridiculous. Like, the Prussians had the absolute best standards for officers. In order to be an officer in Prussia, you had to apply to a specific unit, right? And they put you through a bunch of screenings, and then you spent a year being the bottom bitch of that unit. Like, you were the grunt. You did the worst work because you were supposed to understand that unit from top to bottom, right? Then you had to pass, I think an IQ test. After a year, you needed to receive a positive review from more than 50% of that unit in your time doing all the grunt work. You need to display a good psych eval, and you had to go through a highly discriminatory, highly difficult test to become an officer, and then you were an officer for that specific unit in the Prussian army. That's an actual standard. Like, that is an actual standard. Not like, oh yeah, I studied animation at University of Phoenix online and I have a bachelor's. Now I'm going to be an officer in the military. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all.
No, that's absolutely correct. And, I'm saying this a little bit hypocritically because I'm going into the military exactly, to be an officer exactly, because I have that degree. But yeah, no, that's completely correct. Like, the standards for officership in the United States military should be just simply like, Mr. Dan, I could fucking, I could like spend all night at Mr. Brooks's expense outlining my very detailed plan for military for military reform. But like, the first two things I would do would just simply be, all women immediately retired.
Oh, thank God.
Immediately, just like women just do not belong in the army. Not in support roles, not in medical roles. No, just out. Like, all of them. None of them will be wearing a uniform. This includes trannies. Gays will also be explicitly barred. Of course, you can't trick them you can't stop them from implicitly entering, and that's something, but no, explicitly they have to be barred. I may also, I would also, depending on how much leeway I had to work with, and assuming that the First Amendment was no longer a pesky roadblock, limit service to Christians. And yeah, but basically, and that's just like the first 5 things I would do. That's just, and I think it would solve maybe 80% of the problems that the U.S. military is currently facing.
Yeah, I mean, and then another thing too, like in this, we keep running parallel to OGC. Thank God, we're not getting too tangential. But like another thing that has been outlawed, you're not allowed to be proud of your European heritage. That's one, right? You're not allowed to. Meritocracy has been gone for at least 2 decades now. And the third is male-only spaces. Like you're not allowed to have a male-only space. You're going to get hit with some like discrimination lawsuit, right? And that's extended to the military where it literally doesn't make any sense. When you, Letters from the Ruins, I mentioned him already once before in this podcast, but he's a very, very good creator on Instagram. He wants to open a gymnasium in the UK. He's British. There's going to be a male-only gymnasium with very discriminating standards. When you put men in a male-only space, the energy is unmatched. If you introduce a woman to that space, they're going to be reacting to that. It doesn't matter how detached you are, right? Some men are very, very good at detaching themselves from that. I myself consider myself one of those people because my game plan for a long time was I'm going to be a professional fighter and then I'm going to be a monk at Valon Monastery. So despite the fact that I was in the bar industry and constantly getting offered one-night stands, I was like, oh, no, thank you. I have to go to the gym, right? Not many people are going to do that. Right? So most people are going to see the woman nearby and they're like, it suddenly becomes less about the exercise and the goal for that group and more about, man, I hope she's watching me. I hit arm day yesterday and no, you're not in the military to impress women. Adding women to that in any scenario makes absolutely no sense. It will biologically compromise the effectiveness on a scale that probably can't be measured. That makes zero sense. The male-only spaces is something that, I think needs to come back, which is one of the many reasons that I like what you guys are doing with the OGC.
Well, and that's another thing we have. I don't think we've emphasized on this show, but the OGC is all male. I don't know if that wasn't clear with the word fraternal.
A bit too implicit, but yes, no, you have to be a man.
Matter of fact, we have 3 requirements for joining the OGC. We do have membership requirements. Our 3 requirements are: you have to be male, you have to be over the age of 18, and you have to be an American. Now, American, it depends. All right, we explicitly left it at that, but we basically decide who is and who is not.
Right. Well, we're probably coming up on time. And the thing is, I quite frankly have to get back to work. And I probably could have done this, for a proper, 3 or 4 hours as the AA sphere traditionally does, which hopefully we can do again at some point. Paul, I'm sure we'll have many other podcasts about military standards, military history, Virginia and California parallels and whatnot. Mr. Brooks, I would love to speak to you one-on-one on this podcast at some point in the near future.
I'd love to come on. That'd be great.
Awesome. Very much looking forward to it. Gentlemen, your links are in the bio of this video. Are there any last remarks you'd like to say about yourselves, your upcoming work, the OGC, what to look out from, yourselves individually and the OGC?
I mean, if anyone who listens to this hasn't yet sent an email to theoldgloryclub@gmail.com inquiring about chapter membership or something like that, you should definitely do that. Please do that. If you have some anons you want to form a chapter with, contact us. We'll send you a chapter application and we'll get that process going. I mean, other than that, I guess just like and support what we do because it's all for you. It's all for you. Everything we do, it's for you. And anyway, personally, buy my book, listen to Arthur Dane's podcast. And my book you can find it on Gumroad. Country Squire's Notebook. I liked it quite a bit. I liked writing it almost as much as some people liked reading it. And I'm very glad for that. But, Mr. Dane did a show on it. Also, subscribe to Arthur Dane's podcast and listen to all of Arthur Dane's stuff and become a client of his on Anti-Fragile Fitness, because I know you all could be doing better and could be doing more. And Mr. Dane is the is the best individual to bring that out of you. So so do that as well.
Appreciate you saying that, man. Thank you so much. And honestly, the listeners, like, A Country Squire's Notebook is legitimately one of my favorite books. I'm not just saying that because he's here. Like, it's probably my top 10 favorite books that I've read. It's fantastic. You should read it, and you should, aggressively anticipate Paul finally writing more books from his mythos. Sorry, more writing more books from his mythos.
Hey, look, you wanna fucking pay me? You want to commission one? Go right ahead. Pay my living expenses for a month. You'll get a book.
It's very tempting, honestly. But yeah, certainly follow Mr. Fahrenheit's Substack and follow his work and the OGC. Mr. Brooks?
I have nothing to shield but my Substack, which will be linked in the description. Definitely do all of what Paul and Mr. Dane have said, and yeah, definitely check out the Old Glory Club. We're going places, and you're going to you will want to be along with us when we get there.
Excellent. To the listeners, follow the Old Glory Club. They're doing great work. Whether you want to join or not, check out their Substack. There's a bunch of great articles. Amazing all-star team they have. Not just Mr. Fahrenheit and Mr. Brooks, but follow Mr. Fahrenheit and Mr. Brooks. As far as what's coming on the content side from Blood and Rain, long-awaited Substack articles are in the pipeline, I promise. I am just preparing for my wedding, preparing to move to Europe, and I'm in a pretty critical time with Anti-Fragile Fitness. A lot of clients have a lot of needs right now, and I'm training new coaches, Mr. Saxon Cross and Cannonball Jake. If you guys in the Instagram sphere, you obviously know who those two individuals are. But the Substack articles coming out, I did promise you guys Drive, a piece of Vital Americana. I'm finishing that up. I have a very long article describing and outlining anti-culture that I'll release and probably come on Jay Burden's show to talk about. Sleepless chapters are on pause until October. It's just too much to remember and then write down, but they will be back. I promise. Thank you so much for your patience. There'll be a podcast this Sunday, since I finished reading Lantern of Grace by the biography about St. John Maximovich, the Saint of San Francisco. That will be the Sunday morning before Divine Liturgy. And subscribe to all the aforementioned Substacks and whatnot. For Anti-Fragile Fitness, there is a link to our Instagram. Send us a DM. If you want to put on close to 200 pounds in your squat in 6 months, like Mr. Nick Tax, do so. If you want to get jacked and highly conditioned for a fight, like Colin Zastro, who just won his MMA fight, who has a 650 deadlift, do so. But as always, gentlemen, good night, good storms, God bless. Thank you.